A few years ago, Nicolas Escobar, the nephew of the infamous Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar, stumbled upon something insane. A plastic bag stuffed with $18 million in cash. His uncle had hidden it in the wall of an apartment Nicolas later inherited and lived in. Can you imagine? The guy must have been tearing up, mourning his uncle who was killed over 3 decades ago, all while wiping his tears with $100 bills. See, Pablo Escobar had this wild habit of hiding his insane amounts of cash in the weirdest places. Inside walls, buried in the ground, or stashed in abandoned warehouses. Even now, people believe a huge chunk of his fortune is still out there, hidden in random, unknown locations. Now you might be wondering, why didn't Pablo just stash his money in a bank like the rest of us do? Well, the answer's pretty simple. His money was dirty. As a drug lord, he couldn't just walk into a bank and deposit millions under his name, not without cleaning it first. And that, my dear subscriber, is the biggest headache for crime bosses, whether they're into drugs, weapons, fraud, or any illegal business. They can't spend or save their money without laundering it first. But that raises another question. Why does this whole money laundering thing even need to happen? Is there some magical detergent they use? Or does any old soap do the trick? And most importantly, how does all of this affect regular folks like you and me? Stick around, because in this episode I'm answering all your questions, my dear subscriber. Let's get into it. Between 1920 and 1933, America had this federal law called the Volstead Act. It was basically the Prohibition era, where producing, selling, or even transporting alcohol was a crime. But let's be real, alcohol didn't magically disappear, and Americans definitely didn't stop drinking. Instead, a massive black market for booze popped up, and guess who controlled it? The Italian Mafia. One of their most infamous players? None other than Don Al Capone. This guy made millions smuggling alcohol, living the high life with the best suits, the finest food, fancy cigars, luxury cars, jewelry, and, of course, the company of the most stunning women. But even Al Capone had a problem. A really annoying one. What was he supposed to tell the US government when they inevitably asked him, "Where's all this money coming from?" I mean, think about it. He was just a kid in his 20s, whose dad was a barber. And in America, you can't just deposit mountains of cash in a bank without raising some eyebrows. The first question they'll ask is, what's the source of this money? So, Capone had to come up with a convincing story. One that didn't scream criminal mastermind. Oh, I inherited it from my family. Yeah, right. That excuse doesn't fly when you're dealing with millions of dollars. We're not talking about a couple of $1,000 here. That's when Capone got creative. He decided to make his money look legitimate by buying a chain of laundromats. A seemingly innocent business, right? He'd mix in chunks of his illegal earnings with the daily revenue from the laundromats, making it all appear squeaky clean. To the government, it looked like his wealth was coming from a totally legal and straightforward source. And believe it or not, it is said that this little trick is where the term money laundering supposedly comes from. But here's the kicker. In 1932, when Al Capone was finally arrested, it wasn't for money laundering. Nope, they got him on tax evasion. Why? Because in the US, money laundering wasn't even considered a crime back then. It didn't officially become illegal until 1986. How wild is that? Nova, you keep going on about money laundering this, money laundering that. But what exactly is money laundering? Well, my dear subscriber, it's the process of hiding the true source of dirty money and making it look clean and legit, so you can spend it like it's no big deal. In simple terms, it's taking money made from illegal activities, like drugs, weapons, or other shady stuff, and transforming it into money that looks like it came from lawful, traceable business dealings. It's all neatly documented in the books, with receipts and everything. Alright, so now we know what money laundering is, but how does it actually work? I mean, how do you convince anyone that cash from, say, drug dealing or arms trafficking is totally legal? Here's the thing, my dear subscriber. Money laundering has come a long way since Al Capone's laundromat days. These days, the people involved are way more careful. They run their schemes through a complex web of transactions to make it almost impossible for governments or banks to trace the original source. There are tons of methods for laundering money, but they all follow the same basic 3-step process: placement, layering, integration. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're hearing all these fancy economic terms and already feeling like you want to click away. But don't worry, forget about the jargon. Let me break it down for you in the simplest way possible. Stick around, and I promise it'll all make sense. The first thing criminals do when laundering their money is break it down into smaller chunks, nothing too flashy or noticeable. This makes it easier to deposit into banks without raising any red flags or awkward questions. They open multiple accounts in different banks and branches, either in their own country or even abroad. These accounts could be in their name, their spouse's name, their kids, or even under some close friends. The goal? To get that money into the banking system any way they can. This is the hardest step because it's the first point where the dirty money comes into contact with the legitimate financial world. But once it's in, they move on to step 2. Here's where things get creative. They start putting that money into businesses or investments, stocks, crypto, real estate, you name it. The idea is to give the money a new identity. For instance, if they buy a property, they hold on to it for a few months, sell it, buy another and repeat. Same with stocks. Buy, hold, sell, and do it all over again. This repetition is key. Why? Because the more they repeat these transactions, the harder it gets for anyone to trace the money back to its shady origins. Over time, they build a long, convoluted history of deals, numbers, and records. And this overwhelming trail confuses investigators, making it almost impossible for them to connect the dots. This stage, known as layering, is super complex but absolutely worth the effort for them. Then comes the third stage, collecting the laundry. This is where they gather all that clean money into one place. At this point, they can use it openly and legally, whether to invest in hotels, restaurants, or more real estate. If anyone, be it a bank or an investigator, asks about the money, they simply pull out their pristine records, proof of all their property purchases, stock trades, and other investments. It's all there, a spotless track record. By now, the government is left scratching its head, following all those transactions and tracing the original source of the money? Nearly impossible. It's a masterstroke, really, if you think about it. Let me give you an example that happens all the time these days. Imagine someone has $10 million, but it's all dirty money from illegal activities. What do? They transfer it to a country like Switzerland or Panama, places known for their relaxed attitudes toward the origins of funds. Next, they set up a fake company on paper, claiming it made huge profits. To make it look even more legitimate, they pay taxes on those profits, just like any other business. Some even go the extra mile by donating to charities or funding social projects as a form of cover. Here's another example. They might buy incredibly expensive art. We're talking millions for a single painting. Later, they sell it, usually to another criminal. Funny enough, neither of them cares about art. It's just a way to move money around. Or they might go for high-value items like jewelry, gold and diamonds, for instance. Or take their cash straight to legal gambling spots like casinos. Casinos are actually one of the most popular and efficient ways to launder money. Why? Because money changes hands so fast there. You just gamble, claim you won big, and the casino provides official checks and documentation to back up your story. In no time, your dirty money is as good as clean. Is money laundering harmful to a country? Of course it's extremely harmful, both socially and economically. From a social perspective, successful money laundering operations only encourage more criminals to engage in shady activities. Think about it. The more these operations succeed, the more we'll see crimes like theft, fraud, drug trafficking, and arms dealing escalate. It creates a vicious cycle, fueling even more illegal activities. Now, on the economic side, the impact can be devastating, especially for developing countries. Why? These countries often lack strict laws to protect themselves from such dirty money. You might be thinking, hey, isn't it a good thing for developing countries to have lots of money flowing in? Surely their economy benefits from it, right? Not exactly. It's not as simple as it sounds. When illegal money enters the economy, it can cause temporary inflation in certain sectors, like real estate. Remember how we talked about money launderers investing in properties? Here's what happens. When a lot of dirty money is pumped into the real estate market, it creates an artificial demand. Property prices skyrocket, and ordinary people who genuinely want to buy homes can't afford them anymore. Then, after a while, these launderers start selling off their properties, which leads to a market crash. This kind of manipulation destroys the real estate market for legitimate investors. Why? Because these criminals don't care about making profits like honest businesses do. They're fine with selling properties at ridiculously low prices, or even taking losses, just to make their illegal money look clean. As a result, genuine investors can't compete with them, and the entire market suffers. And that's not the worst part. Most of the money laundered into the country eventually leaves it. In the end, the economy doesn't just fail to grow, it's left worse off than before. The damage is real, and it's substantial. Here's another scenario. Let's say you're an honest, hardworking person about to start a new startup. You're on the lookout for investors, and one shows up who you don't know much about. Maybe you don't know their background at all, or maybe you do, but you're unaware they're involved in illegal activities or laundering money. You start the project together, and everything seems fine. Until one day, all the money this investor put in disappears, and the investor themselves vanishes into thin air. What happens next? Your project crashes and burns. And you're not alone. Hundreds of thousands of small and medium-sized businesses have suffered the same fate. Money laundering also puts banks in legal trouble, whether or not they're aware of the dirty money passing through their systems. There have been cases of banks shutting down in various countries because of their involvement in laundering operations. Most of these cases involve corrupt employees within the bank who collaborate with criminals. Still, the responsibility lies with the bank. It's accountable for what its staff does and what happens on its premises. The fallout can be catastrophic for the bank. Globally, the total amount of laundered money is estimated to reach trillions of dollars annually, facilitated by interconnected networks. Many banks play dead, taking the silent role in these operations, as intermediaries and enablers in exchange for hefty commissions. They often bank on the fact that government investigators are understaffed and overwhelmed. These investigations can take months, sometimes years, as they sift through millions of documents and reports. Yet, despite the risks, scandals continue to surface every now and then, shaking the global economy. Think of cases like the FinCEN files, the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, and Swiss leaks. Each of these exposed just how deeply ingrained money laundering is in the system. And here's the kicker: not much has changed. Why? Because there are far too many powerful players who have a vested interest in keeping things exactly as they are. That's it for today's episode. This is Nova from Nova Briefcase. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, hit that like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next episode. Bye.